Hello my sweet friends and welcome to Kinda Shabby. My name is Becky and I am so glad you stopped by. In today's video, we're going to give this grapevine wreath a fresh new look for fall. You guys really enjoyed last week's video with the paper garland, so now I have another fun project using book pages and lunch sacks. And finally, I'm going to be making the cutest little pumpkin trio out of these 4x4 pieces of wood. Well, we've got lots of cuteness in store today, so let's go ahead and get these projects started. So let's get started with this wreath. Now, when I make my seasonal wreaths, I don't hot glue anything. I use floral wire, so that way I can reuse my form. My flowers here have just been tucked into the vine, so I haven't even glued or wired any of those down. And I am going to be saving these because I love hydrangeas and those are just going to be so pretty to use again in another project. Then this is a garland that I picked up from Hobby Lobby several years ago and I've just wired that on. So I'm going to find it where I've attached it with my floral wire and then just remove my garland. Then I'm going to see if I have anything that I can salvage off of this garland, maybe these leaves. But so much of this is just literally just cracking and peeling just from dry rot from being on my front porch in direct sun. So this is not going to be able to be saved, but I will save what I can. So these picks here from Hobby Lobby are the inspiration that I want to put on my little wreath here. So I'm going to be using some various colors here of paint to paint some existing leaves that I have and also to paint some of these plain pumpkins as well. And I'm going to start with a coat of the Waverly chalk paint in the color moss on each of my pumpkins here. And this color really matches the base color in this little pumpkin right here. So once we get all of our pumpkins painted in this moss color, we'll go back and start adding in some of these various other shades present on my inspiration pumpkin. I think I'm going to try the brown paint first, and that is the Waverly in the color Truffle. And if I don't like that, I may come back with the antiquing wax. I'm not sure which one of those I'm going to like better. So I'm going to try and get most of that paint off of that brush and dry brush that on and just see if I like that look. That looks all right. So while that's drying, I'm going to try one with the antiquing wax and just see if I like that better. I think I do like the antiquing wax better. I think it gives it more of an aged look than just the solid paint. So I'm going to go ahead and add the antiquing wax to the rest of our pumpkins, and then we'll come back and get our other colors on. Now I'm just going to dab on some yellow, and I may have to come back over with the antiquing wax again just to tone down some of that yellow. I think that's looking good. This one, I added some of the copper to that, and I really like it. So I'm just going to have fun painting my pumpkins, and then we'll come back and get some of our leaves done as well. So I'm really pleased with how these plain white foam pumpkins turned out. I really like those, but I don't like how these painted orange leaves turned out. They look okay, but this took 2 coats and that orange is still popping through. So instead of using the orange leaves, I am going to continue to highlight the green leaves. So for these leaves, I just start with some of my antiquing wax. Just kind of go over that to darken the leaf up. So it just adds a little bit to that plain leaf. Then I come back in with a little bit of the gold. Go around the edges with that. And then I'm going to come back with the copper. I want to rub most of that off, so I'm kind of dry brushing that onto the leaf so it adds interest to those plain little leaves. And again, you can see the difference between the two. Adding just a little bit of color adds a lot more interest to that. So I'm going to paint a few more of these, and then we're going to come back and get our wreath put together. So I took some wood skewers and cut them in half and applied the antiquing wax to them. And now I'm just going to take that and insert that in the bottom of my foam pumpkin. And because these are foam, that really just goes right up in there quite easily. And then that's what I'm going to use to be able to tuck that into my wreath. So first thing I'm going to do is lay out my big pumpkins. And I want to do only half of the wreath here. And I know that I want these at either end. So I'm just going to lay those there like that. See where I want my pumpkins to go. So I think that's spaced out enough. So now I can go ahead and get those pieces put in. And I am going to clip these off just a little bit because that's awfully long. And just tuck that into the grapevine wreath. So now I'm going to remove the pumpkins and I'm going to glue some leaves to the bottom. Then when I tuck it back into place, I can see what else I need to add. And I do cut my leaves apart. That way I can place the leaves exactly where I want them. So I'm just going to keep adding leaves to each of my pumpkins until they look nice and full, and then we'll come back and add our other embellishments. Pull off all my little wheat bushes, and then I'm going to trim these down as well because there's a hard wire in there. So I'm just going to trim these down, and we're going to place those around in our wreath as well. So as I tuck in my corn husks, I can come back in and glue the wheat down on top of that. This is just too flimsy for it to stay inside the grapevine wreath, so I will be gluing that down on top of my little corn husks. And you can see how just that simple addition fills in that area right there. And I'm just going to do the same thing all the way around, just tucking and filling in where those spots look bare. I really like how that turned out, and I can't wait to get it on my front door. Well, let me get all this mess cleaned up and we'll move on to our next project. For our next project, we're going to be using our book pages, our lunch sacks, and some styrofoam balls to create some beautiful paper orbs. And I have already started on this one. This is just such a simple project. The only thing that takes a while is cutting out all of your pieces. So for the ones with the book pages, I am using my 2-inch punch just to take and punch out circles. So we're going to need plenty of these if you use a punch. And for the lunch sacks, I'm actually going to be tearing these into strips. I'm going to cut the center of my bag and cut off the bottom of the bag as well. Then we're left with a nice long piece of gorgeous brown paper. This is a 2-inch punch and I want to keep them the same size, so I'm going to be marking my paper in 2-inch increments. But you can make yours any size that you like. Then I line up my marks and just tear my paper into 2-inch strips. And now that we have all of these torn into 2-inch strips, we're going to measure and mark, and we're going to also tear these into 2 by 2-inch pieces. So that is what we're left with when we tear our paper bag. And you can also tear your book pages. You don't have to use a punch. You can do however you want to get your pieces. I'm also using 3-inch styrofoam balls, and I'm going to be using the blunt end of one of my old foam paintbrushes. Put that in the middle, and I'm going to scrunch it up all around that edge. Add a dot of glue and glue that to the styrofoam ball. And we're going to place those close together. And that's all we're going to do until we have all of our foam balls covered in our paper. And this is what we have so far. I think they're both really pretty, but I just love the texture that those torn edges give to the paper. Look how pretty these turned out. Now, we'll have to say it took several hours to cut all of these pieces and glue them onto the foam ball, but I just love how pretty these are. Honestly, they almost look like little flowers. I love them. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our last project. And for our last project, we're going to be doing these cute little 4x4 wood pumpkins. And I have seen these all over Pinterest for several years, and I finally decided that now we're going to make a few. And if you don't have wood, you can decorate anything from a jar or a box. Anything along those lines will actually make a cute little pumpkin. I'm also using my favorite holiday plates for my color inspiration, and I'll be base coating all pieces of the wood in the Waverly Plaster chalk paint. And then once all this dries, we'll start decorating our little wood pumpkins. And now that these are dry, I am once again going to be using my plate here for inspiration. And you see, of course, it has various pumpkins and some vines in there. And I am going to be stamping this using my Iron Orchid Designs Fruitful Harvest stamp set. If you do not have the stamps, I actually have some printables for you. And you can print these off and decoupage that to your wood to give you a similar look. Now, before I begin stamping, I want to lay out my design. I've got pumpkins and leaves on this page, apples and more leaves, and then we've got some gorgeous vines here on the second page. I know this looks like a jumbled mess because I actually have 3 stamps lying on top of each other. So I like this section here of the little vine, and I want that to stick out from between the pumpkins. And then I've got my large pumpkin and my smaller pumpkin here. And once I begin stamping, this will all start to make sense. But I have to stamp whatever I want to be in the foreground. That has to be stamped first. So I'll remove my pumpkins, still maintaining where I want my vine to be. So I'm going to take some blue painter's tape and actually put it to where I want the stamp to go between. So that way when I stamp it, it's going to be exactly where I want it to be. So now I can put my ink on, and I'm using the archival ink in the color Coffee, my absolute favorite color to use. And I'm only going to apply the ink to the part of the stamp that I want that design to show. I'm not going to ink the entire thing. So now I can come back and hover and see that that is exactly where I want my leaf to go. So I can remove my tape now. And that's what we have so far. I love it. It's kind of hard to see, but inside your packaging, you have what is called a mask. And what that allows is for you to layer your stamping. I'm going to tape that down using my blue painter's tape again, and then I can stamp my pumpkin over it and not muddy up that design. Now, because I only used a small section here, I'm actually going to cut my mask. I'm going to be able to stamp right over that and still retain my image below. And it'll all start making better sense in just a minute. Ink up my pumpkin, hover and place it down. And since my stamp is extending past the side, I'm just going to wrap that around, all around my piece of wood here. And there we have our cute little pumpkin. But then when I remove the mask, look how cute that is. That way our leaf is in the foreground. I want to put my big pumpkin over the top of all of this now. So I'm going to put my mask back over my vine. I'm not going to use the tape because now I'm going to be stamping over the whole thing. And I also need to cover up my little pumpkin with the mask that fits that design. So now I can ink my large pumpkin. And then I can hover over and see exactly where I want it. And again, I'm going over the side to extend the design all the way around. We've got our big pumpkin in the background, our leaves right here, and then our other pumpkin in the foreground. With it being the same color, the design is kind of hard to see. So that's why I'm going to be taking my paints here and adding color, so then everything stands out just like the individual designs do on my plate. So I'm going to wait for my ink to thoroughly dry before I begin painting, and then in the meantime I'm just going to go to the sink and rinse all of this off with some warm soapy water. Using that same concept, I have stamped all 3 of my little pumpkins, and I have stamped on all sides. I just love the way that looks, and I most certainly could just leave it like that because that's just beautiful. But I am going to be taking, like I said, some of these paints here, and then I also have paper towels, handy wipes, and also some water. And I am going to go ahead, dip into my water, and just kind of get that to where it looks like watercolor paint. Dab off a little bit of that wetness on my paper towel. And then I'm just going to come in and start on my leaf here. Now I'm going to add just a little bit more of the paint because I want a more saturated color. Then I can come back over that and blot off the excess, so I have a darker color with more saturation, but you can still see the stamp from underneath. And I just love painting these stamps. It is just so relaxing. So I have just this front side I've started over here, and I've carried it on around that way. But you can see how when you start to paint these, that just really adds to the detail. And I think I'm doing a pretty good job with my colors here too. So I'm just going to end up painting all of these in these gorgeous colors, and then we'll come back and we'll put some stems on our pumpkins. I am so happy with how these little pumpkins turned out. Mr. Shabby actually liked some of the areas that were stamped to be left unpainted. You'll have to let me know, should I finish painting everything, or do you like some of these areas left unpainted as well? But I am just so happy with how these turned out. I'll be using these gorgeous cabinet knobs that I picked up a couple of years ago. I think that that's going to look really cute on top of my little pumpkins here as the stem, but I am going to be adding a little bit of my Titebond wood glue along the screws here just to make sure that it doesn't come out of the little hole. And Mr. Shabby actually drilled some in the middle here after I had marked the middle of each of my 4x4s. So I'm just putting a little bit of glue on the screw there, and I'm going to tuck that into the hole, and then I'm going to let that glue set up. Then I'm going to do the same thing with these two here and apply them to the tops of these wood blocks as well. So after gluing on all my cabinet knobs, I then went back with some matching green raffia, and also I used some brown floral wire to create little tendrils here, and I just love how these turned out. Now all I need to do is show you a closer look at all of this week's projects and also share my exciting news with you. Thank you so much for joining me today. It has been my pleasure to craft with you. And now for my big announcement. We are moving to Tennessee, and I am so excited. Most of my family lives in Tennessee and has been there for generations, and I cannot wait to call Tennessee my home too. That being said, I will not be making crafting videos for some time. You will still, however, have lots of crafty inspiration for fall and Christmas in previous crafting tutorials that I have done. I do ask that you send me all of your thoughts and best wishes, and also your prayers that everything goes smoothly so we can be together again soon. And so, my sweet friends, until next time, be blessed.